48. So we are going
This
to
meeting is being recorded.
go ahead and get started. My name is Patience Riley, and thank you so much for being here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. When we were testing out a little bit earlier, we did come to find out that while I'm sharing my screen, I'm not able to see the boxes or the chat. So if you have anything to type into the chat, if you have any reflections regards to the conversation that we're having, or if you have any questions that come up throughout, I'm okay if you come off of mute and kind of pop in and ask or give your input. I will be asking you questions as well. If you're unable to do that and you feel more comfortable with typing in the chat, that's great. Heather agreed to be everyone's voice who needs to type in the chat for me. So I just wanted to give that disclaimer that unfortunately I'm just not able to see it when I'm in presenter view. So there is times where if I'm asking a question or it's more conversational, I will probably slide out of the actual presentation itself and come back to this space so that we can have that discussion and conversation this way, or I can just directly see what you're saying so that she doesn't have to repeat every single thing. Alrighty, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and we can get started. Alrighty. And if somebody doesn't mind just kind of coming off mute really quick and just letting me know that you can actually see this.
I can see it just fine.
Perfect, good. Alrighty, so we are here to talk about how we can better serve our military families in the community during pregnancy and postpartum. So, like I shared with you all before, my name is Patience Riley. I'm a licensed mental health therapist. I've been a therapist for like 10, 11 years. Do have specialized training in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. Got that through Postpartum Support International. I married this handsome fella over here, and I ended up becoming an Air Force spouse after marrying him. But a little fun fact is, I've been a part of a military family for my entire life. My parents were Navy, that's how they met. And so I ended up kind of switching sides when I married my husband. Started out as a Navy brat, grew up and lived that lifestyle, and then met him while I was in college at Winthrop University, and then he and I ended up getting married some years afterwards. So my state licensures, excuse me, are a bit all over the place for that very reason. I'm licensed in Georgia, Florida, and Nebraska. Those are some of the places that we've been stationed. We are currently stationed at Robins Air Force Base, and that is in Warner Robins, Georgia. So I ended up being brought back to that wonderful state that I lived in for quite some time. But with my experience, I've worked at psychiatric hospital, community health agencies, crisis line, as well as a military installation as a military family life counselor. And right now, I'm currently in private practice where I'm able to see clients virtually, do workshops, things of that nature. And I am one of the support group leaders for Postpartum Support International's Military Moms Pregnancy and Postpartum Support Group that we do virtually. But outside of kind of the work stuff, I always say that like work is like my part-time job, my side job, but raising my two little boys are my full-time job. I have a 3-year-old named Remy, and I also have a 7-month-old named Reed. So today I come to you all not just as like a professional, a colleague, a peer in the field. I come to you as a member of the military community as well, and somebody who is also postpartum with that. So I'm very excited to share how we collectively can support the military community. So now that you know a little bit about me, this is one of the times where I will probably be shifting over back to our tiles back on Zoom, I want to know a little bit about you, who you are, your occupation, if you want to share that, if you're interested in sharing your location, and what's your interest in military families or the military community specifically. I really think this is a space for us to kind of come together, to have a conversation, to talk about how we can collectively support this community. So I like for us to be able to know a little bit about each other and how we can connect further. So I'll leave this up for a little bit before switching over. If you're comfortable with coming off of mute and introducing yourself, that is great. If not, if you could just throw that information in the chat, that would be great too.
While there's some time, I'm just going to say my name is Heather Doff, and I'm training to be a marriage and family therapist. I have no experience in the field of working with uh, current military or veterans, so I'm really interested in this subject. We have an Air Force base just a few miles away from my house, so I want to be prepared in case I do have clients come see me with this in this particular community, so I can give them informed care and understand a little bit better about what it is like to be a military spouse or a member of the military in the pregnancy or postpartum period. So I'm grateful to be here.
Awesome. Thank you, Heather. What Air Force base are you close to?
This is Hill Air Force Base in Ogden, Utah.
Okay. Okay. All righty. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you
Oh,
good.
perfect. As my name is Olga Samakhalova, and I'm a nurse for Nurse Family Partnership in Monterey County. Here, I'm actually because my husband is in the military, so it's kind of more my own interest. I'm pregnant right now, and I saw your slides, and I said, "Oh, I don't know some of the facts, so let me just be and hear what you want to share." Thank you so much.
Yeah, well, thank you so much, and thank you for your service and sacrifice too, because that's a huge one. So, I learned a lot, even though I'm a spouse as well. I learned a lot once I kind of started working in the field about different things that are available. So I understand how you feel like, wow, I didn't know this stuff, even though my partners in the military themselves. So I'm hoping that you're able to walk away with something, especially with you being pregnant, maybe some more information and tools for yourself. All righty. And I do not want to mispronounce your name. I'm thinking either Andrea or Andrea. If there ever is a time that you want to drop your info, please do so. And we will check it out in the chat. But thank you for being here as well. All righty. So I'm going to put this back into presenter mode. So a lot of different reasons why we might be interested in military families. Maybe we have a base by us. Maybe we're actually pregnant postpartum ourselves. We might be coming in contact. Maybe we just really, really want to work with this population. So it's good for us to be here and just get a little bit more information about the community as a whole. So today we're going to go over a little bit of military culture and terminology. Also, we're going to look at some risk factors affecting military families, specifically that might be different than the rest of the population. We're going to look at a couple of different research studies. I pulled out a few where they look at the difference between military spouses who have experienced a deployment during pregnancy and postpartum versus those that did not. We're also going to look at the deployment cycle. That can be really helpful for us as like providers to be able to explain, as well as to know when we're working with somebody if they are experiencing a deployment, kind of what stage they're in. That can help us with some of their mental and emotional health. Also, how can we assist them in managing times of separation? So when there is a period where they aren't together, that might be even outside of a deployment, what are some of the things that they can do that can be helpful to kind of keep them together and better their mental health during that time? Also, another one is a new current initiative. So, Olga, this one I'm really excited to share with you about, especially with you being pregnant, because there's a brand new initiative that TRICARE dropped this year that I think is going to be really, really helpful for military families, especially during times of separation. Also, there are different resources out there that are military specific, but I also want us to think about, as people who have probably lived in your communities for some time, there are some resources in the community or connections that you've made that you can get people connected to that they may not know of because of being a military family. So, just have some very simple workshop objectives for you. I'm hoping that you can leave having a basic understanding of military culture and terminology, being able to identify some of the common risk factors that are specific to military. So, some of those things to look out for in addition, as well as what are some protective factors. A lot of times when we work with our clients, we want to see, hey, what are some of their strengths that we can lean on to get them through this period? And so, just going to go over some protective factors as well. Also, I'm hoping that you'll have the ability to understand as well as educate military families on the deployment cycle itself and where they may be standing mentally and emotionally, as well as how to manage some times of separation. In addition, just how can we support these families and how can we do that with their resources that are specific to the military community, as well as the resources that us ourselves as providers will have, and those with our community connections. So we have the various military branches here. Just a little fun fact, when we think about the United States as a whole, there are about 332 million people that are in the United States. And over 2 million of those people are active duty military. So that's not including like spouses, that's not including their children, that's not including like veterans or those that are retired. Those are those that are active duty. So one of the things that I'm really happy was brought up was, hey, I live by a military base. And so there's a possibility that I can see some of these people as clients. So I want to have a little bit more information and some more awareness about this culture itself so that I can better serve them as a provider. And just like cultural competency and cultural awareness in general, the military has its own subculture in itself. So here you will see the different branches. We have Army, Air Force, Navy, Coast Guard, Marine Corps, excuse me. And then we also have Space Force. Space Force is the newbie out of all of the branches. And in addition to active duty service members, we also have reservists as well that are attached to these different military branches. So, as we get into the cultural part of the military culture and what that may look like and what may be some common themes, I wanted to read off each branch's motto just to kind of have you keep that in the back of your mind, because sometimes these mottos can turn into values for that active duty service member that can sometimes flow into the rest of the family as well. So when we look at the Air Force, their motto is above all. Army, this will defend. Coast Guard, always ready. Navy, always courageous. Marines, always faithful. And Space Force, always above. So there are some common themes that I think you'll notice just from hearing those mottos going forward. All right, so when you think of the military, and like I said, you can come off of mute for me, or you can type this in the chat. When you think about military or you hear military family, what are some of the first things that come to mind? when you hear those words?
I hope I can say this with sensitivity, but I often go to trauma, especially for those who've served abroad and seen really difficult, unimaginable things. That's one of the things that I think of as a civilian without any military background.
Okay, that's a great one. That is a great one. Anybody else, or is there anything else that you think of in addition to the trauma? All right. Yeah. Well, when military comes up, there can be different in a variety of things that come to mind when we think of that culture, when we think of that community. Heather brought up a good one. She brought up the trauma. So I mentioned earlier that we're going to kind of talk about deployment and times away. And when I hear someone like kind of connect trauma to the military culture, I think about that the time that they're away from home and they're serving away from home, and kind of the effects that that has on the service member themselves, as well as the effects that it has on their family back home. So we have some different external characteristics as well as internal characteristics that can be going on with military families. And one of the things that I have listed on here is worldview and stigma. Um, Even when we think about the different mottos, like this will defend, always ready, always faithful, always courageous, those are very like strong, powerful, let's push through this. I need to always be prepared type of words. And when that is like your motto and this is your job's motto, that can very much so flow into the person themselves, the way that they view the world. But when we think about mental health and preserving someone's mental health and maybe the trauma that they have been through related to their job, if these are some of your mottos, it can be very difficult to kind of move forward or ask for assistance or seek help or try to say, hey, maybe I think that I'm struggling with this. So, like other groups and other communities, the military community, there are signs of maybe not going out and seeking mental health treatment and mental health help. So, this is where I think it's really important for us to have an understanding of the culture or ways that we can build rapport and connect with the military community, one as a person, because if we can do this as a person and break down some barriers, it can help break that stigma of getting help or seeking help. So, some of just the outward things with the military: structure, uniform, hair, ranking, some of those things very clean cut. We see our gentlemen here saluting. Also, language. Then kind of those internal things that can be related are different values, beliefs, traditions, like I said, how we look at the world. So with the motto, sacrifice, humility, teamwork, taking pride in things, having resiliency. Resiliency, I feel like, is one of those words that the military uses a lot. They use it a ton, a ton, a ton, talking about, just always having to overcome something. So that's where I felt like this quote was very, very fitting. Like, it doesn't get easier, you just get stronger. And so it's always kind of the push of needing to be resilient. But this can kind of flow within families as well. And so I think it's good for us as providers to keep that in mind, that when you come in contact with the military community, there's a possibility that you may be met with some of that, like, sacrifice is something that we do. We're used to these things taking place. We need to be resilient. We need to be able to overcome on ourselves, so we can kind of know if we're dealing with that stigma a little bit, and how we can kind of swoop in and better support them with that. So one of the ways that I think it's easy to kind of get into some subgroups and understand a culture is their language. How do they talk? Um, Olga, you might be able to attest to this, but I feel like the military has an acronym for everything. Every single thing that is out there, it seems like they want to shorten it in some kind of way and do an acronym. So, does anybody at all have any idea what any of these like terms or acronyms might mean? Just from straight looking at it. So I have Mill to Mill on here, PCS, CDC, Readiness Center, TLF, TMO. Does anybody know what any of these things on here stands for? And if you do, can you tell me which one and what does it mean?
I know some of them, but it's just because I've been using them. My husband been using them.
Mhm. Which ones?
CDC for childcare.
Yep. Okay. Yep. So
Yeah.
CDC is Child Development Center. And Olga, let me ask you, how long have you been a military spouse?
8 years.
Okay, yeah, so quite some time. You got some time under your belt. Any others out there that you're familiar with? And this is anybody else besides Olga too.
Well, I don't know if you mean like NEX and commissary. It's a grocery store, but
Yep.
other than
I
that,
sh-
PCS sounds familiar, but I don't really remember what does it mean. Yeah.
yep. So PCS is permanent change of station. So this is when you move. And then we have exchange, BX and NEX, like she was saying, is essentially like kind of a shopping store, and then the commissary is like a grocery store for us that's available. All righty. And so I want to go through a little bit more of these. So for instance, like with Olga saying that she's pregnant, there could be an instance where she was speaking with a provider. So say she came to see Heather, and she wanted to see Heather for some counseling. Heather said she's getting some training in marriage and family therapy. And she came talking to her, and she says, "Hey, my husband and I have our child on the wait list for the CDC, but I'm really worried that they're not going to have space in time for us to actually get her or him in by the time they're born so I can get back to work. And that is really stressful for me." Well, if Heather has no idea what CDC is, she may be able to use context clues and figure it out. Or if she has like a little bit of information and knowledge about it, she might know, hey, this is Child Development Center. Or throughout their conversation, may be able to piece that together. Or if she was speaking with her even further and she said, hey, after we meet today, I have to rush over to the commissary, or I have to go over to the exchange so that I can, you know, pick up a couple of groceries or pick up a few items, she would know that she's talking about a place that's located on base or something that's located on the installation. So sometimes being able to talk the talk with military families can help us develop that rapport. It can help us develop trust. It can help kind of ease explanation, if that makes sense, of having to stop telling you about what I'm coming to see you for and having to break down every single term that I'm explaining. instead. So I just want to briefly go through some of these just because I know that you all do have the slides if you wanted to jot off to the side what some of these terms mean. Mill to mill, essentially, that is a military person that's married to another military person. So we would call it like mill to mill. In the case of Olga and myself, our spouses is military to civilian. Versus the mill to mill. And then installation, base, or post. Like Heather mentioned earlier, she's located next to an Air Force base. So that's also the installation that's close to her. And sometimes Army uses post. So you might hear people say that, like, I'm going back to post. That means that they're going back to the installation. We went through the exchange, the BX, the NEX, PX commissary. The different terms of them is BX might be base exchange, NEX might be Navy exchange, and PX would be post exchange. So still the same, just a difference based off of the military branch. And then PCS. PCS is permanent change of station. So this would be when somebody is moving. So as I kind of explained earlier, my husband and I have moved around from different places, and Olga, this might be where that one sounded familiar. Maybe you all ended up moving, and someone may come to you and say, hey, I just PCS'd here from Florida, or hey, we're PCSing to Georgia. So PCS is almost like that word for move, except a military family might say PCS instead of, hey, I moved here from Florida, or I'm moving to Georgia. They may use the term of PCSing because the move is done because of the military. Also, deployment. Deployment is that time of separation where the military service member, um, has that time away from their family where they're doing their job. And this is typically overseas. There are some deployments that can happen within the state themselves or wherever that family is stationed, stationed as in living in that particular time. The deployment, though, I more so want us to think about it when it's farther away. So somebody might still be over here and their spouse might be deployed to like Japan or Korea or Germany or somewhere in Europe. And these are typically for longer lengths of time. And depending on the branch, sometimes determines that time frame as well. So what I've seen is that Navy has really long deployment times, Marine has long deployments, Army, Air Force, I have noticed, have been a little bit on the shorter side as far as deployments, but also specific, different for the jobs. And then we also have TDYs. So TDYs, I want you all to think about that. This is um, a temporary duty assignment. This is almost like a mini deployment. It's time where you're away from your family, but it's usually for a shorter period of time. So, where a deployment can be anywhere from like 9 months, 6 months, maybe even a year, a TDY could be as short as like a week, 2 days, or it could be something that's like 2 weeks or a month. So it can be something that's shorter than that. So you may hear somebody say like, hey, I have to TDY to Vegas for a month. And that means that they're just going on a short assignment away from their family. TMO, this stands for Transportation Management Office. A lot of times when I hear TMO getting brought up, it's usually due to somebody having something stressful happening with their move or with their PCS. TMO has to like kind of give you your orders, or what somebody may say, cut their orders. And they're the ones that manage the things that happen with your move. Moving is stressful in general. And so sometimes when this office ends up being brought up in conversations, it might end up being stressful. CDC, like we said, is Child Development Center. Bases do have child care, as well as youth programs. So there are daycares that are associated and on base themselves that military families can get on wait lists. So this can be a great resource to know of if you're working with a military family and they're needing childcare or looking for childcare. Kind of saying like, hey, have you gotten on the wait list and taken those steps? With the CDC. Also, in relation to a move, something called TLF, which is temporary living facility. Sometimes you don't have a place to live when you first move in PCS to a different base. So you get a certain time frame. A lot of times they give you up to 10 days to look for a place to live. And some people will stay in the TLF, the temporary living facility. So it could be the base hotel, it could be base housing that was turned into the TLFs. That's what that could be. Ops tempo, this could be important because it explains like the work hours. A lot of times when we hear about ops tempo, it's when it's high. So that means the service member is working a lot of hours. So we know kind of working pulls that person away from the family. And so when the ops tempo is really high, it's usually higher stress conditions that are going on. And as providers, as spouses, as peers working with this community, readiness centers. Pretty much every single base should have a readiness center. And if you're trying to think of, hey, what is I'm needing some assistance with getting the contact information to the CDC, or I'm needing assistance with school support, or I have a client that needs some financial assistance to kind of help them out along with some of their mental and emotional stress that's going on. The Readiness Center is kind of that one stop hub of knowing everything. So if you just kind of have the base that's by you and you look it up really quick and you type in Readiness Center, it should pull up that contact information. And they're almost like a cheat code of like, hey, what all services do you offer to military families? So readiness centers are a great thing to kind of have the information for to share with those military families. And I know that that is kind of a lot of information, but anybody have any questions in regards to talking the talk and understanding some of that military lingo? And I'm checking my time too.
We're doing okay on time. It's 1:20 your time. I just was hoping for clarification on OPS tempo. I
Yes,
must
yeah.
have missed the definition.
Yeah, so ops tempo. Oh, so it's operational. Oh, I probably jotted it down. Oh, gosh, it is the breakdown of the acronyms are actually slipping my mind right now. Um, oh, I believe it's operational performance speed tempo. So ops tempo lets us know essentially kind of the work status and the work hours. So essentially when a service member is one, let's say like needing to get what they call like mission ready, maybe they have a deployment that's going on, or say we have a high stress event that might have just happened within the world, the ops tempo within that person's unit may go up where they're working more hours. So with them working more hours, that can put stress on families just from them not able to come home as early as they used to be. Maybe they're working 14-hour shifts versus their typical 8-hour shift. So in a conversation, somebody may end up having like, hey, I'm having a really hard time balancing with my work as well as being home because our ops tempo is really high right now. So what they're saying is that our operations is really, really high and we're having to push out a lot. So I'm having to stay at work for a longer period of time. That's kind of like a faster way of saying that. So I hope I explained that.
Yes, that's great. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Perfect. In addition, like I said, some of these, I'm not saying you have to know every single one or know it perfectly or anything like that. As you see, I just kind of fumbled and forgot exactly the full breakdown of one. But having some context can be really helpful. And also, there just may be times where you don't know what someone is like. They might be using an acronym, they might be using like a term, and you just have no idea. You've never heard it. You're trying to listen to the context clues, and you just have no idea what they're talking about. It's okay to ask as well. It won't necessarily, break down full rapport or anything like that. But if you need to know. Um, I like to think that I know a lot of different terminology just from hearing it for so long. But I was working with a client one time who got me hip to some military slang that I had no idea was even out there. She came in, and I believe she was anywhere between like 4 to 5 months postpartum. And she was explaining to me how she wasn't motivated, she lacked energy, she was feeling fatigued and tired all the time. She wasn't really keeping up with her ADLs as much, so not showering as much as she used to, kind of not combing her hair from time to time, not really wanting to cook or having the energy to do that, not feeling connected to her baby, not feeling connected to her spouse. So she's mentioning some of these symptoms, and that's how I looked at it. And I'm like, okay, so she's definitely experiencing some type of depressive symptoms, for the time, the frequency, the duration, all of that from what she was saying to me. But as we were talking and as we were conversing, she kept throwing out this term, dependa. And she kept telling me, when I'm not connecting with my baby, or I'm feeling super tired, or I'm not really feeling motivated, or I don't have the energy to take a shower. She kept connecting that with, I don't want to turn into a dependa. I don't want my husband to see me as a dependa. I don't want my friends to think that I'm a dependa. And so, as that conversation kept going on, I still just could not figure out what is a dependa. I have never, ever heard of that. And so, towards the end of our conversation, I ended up asking her, and we talked about some of the different signs and symptoms, and we were coming up kind of with a game plan of things that she could do before we met again. And I asked her, what is a dependa? Like, I know you've used this term a lot while we were talking. I've just never heard of it before. Can you tell me what dependa means? And she essentially was saying that it was kind of like a negative, derogatory term, um, shortened for dependent. So a dependent can be like a military spouse. So I'm a dependent. I'm one of my husband's dependents, as well as our two sons are his dependents. But she said that a dependent is specifically a military spouse who, um, is overweight, keeps a dirty house, doesn't keep up with themselves, and has kind of let themselves go and isn't taking care of their household. And so when she was experiencing these different symptoms, depressive symptoms, in her mind, she kept thinking of it as, I'm turning into a dependa. So I thought that that was a very good learning opportunity for myself to know that some spouses who are aware of this, may be coming from a space of thinking that their symptoms are who they're turning into and who they're becoming. And it could also be making them feel additional shame, guilt, and that may be another layer of something else that we have to work on and work through. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there, as there's some military slang out there that may come to the forefront that I had no idea even existed. Um, Also, another one, Heather, I know you said that you're close to an Air Force base. Another bit of military slang that I found out is people calling each other nonners. So Noner. And this kind of being like a negative term for those who are in the Air Force who do not fly. So their job and their position isn't taking place on the airplane. It just kind of takes place on the ground. Unfortunately, I ended up finding out about that term while I was meeting with a couple, and one of the partners ended up throwing it out there as a jab to the other one. And so I ended up having them explain that to me because the other person kind of had a big gasp after being called that term. Alrighty. Anything else before we move on? I know that that's kind of a lot of information, but I think talking the talk and connecting with people through language can be really, really helpful. Okay, great. So as we go forward, I kind of brought up, with a previous client that I had worked with, some of the different things that she mentioned and some of the symptoms and signs that she was experiencing and going through. Now, if you come in contact with someone, there can be some common risk factors that we think of related to just perinatal mood and anxiety disorders in general. We know that 1 in 5 birthing persons are affected with the perinatal mood and anxiety disorder, and military families are amongst this number. So, in addition to some of the risk factors that we're aware of maybe having family history of mental health or previous mental health conditions or experiencing loss or having multiple children or even having like issues with like thyroid or diabetes, those can be risks. There are additional risk factors that some military families can experience that can add on additional layers and risk for them having a perinatal mood and anxiety disorder. So, with some of those, like we talked about, I'm going to use some of the terminology and just kind of give us some practice from the previous slide of talking the talk. A PCS, so frequent moves, working long hours, so and having to deal with that. So the long work hours of the ops tempo, of how the operations are working. I felt like it was very important right now, especially with what's going on in the world with Ukraine and Russia, to bring up that our military members do at times work in dangerous and very life threatening conditions. And so, not only can that be difficult on the service member, it can be very difficult on their family as well. Also, times of separation. So, some of those TDYs or some of those deployments that then can bring on solo parenting where the person back home is parenting by themselves, but they're used to parenting with somebody. Also, some lack of physical support. So, say you PCS often, you're moving around often. Well, when you move, you have to rebuild and reconnect with a physical support system. Yes, you may have some extended support, but having to kind of redevelop those friendships, those connections, those providers, that physical support might be gone depending how frequently somebody is moving or how long they've been in a place. So I think that that is a very, very important risk factor for us as providers to know as well of like, well, how long have you lived in this community? Or what are your connections like in this community? Because we can use our own knowledge and connections within our own communities to also share with these families and these persons. In the other breath, where there are some additional risk factors associated with military families, there are also protective factors. So when you're having your conversations, when you're building rapport, when you're connecting, you can also kind of look at what are some of their strengths, some of the things going forward. One of the things that I said earlier, military families are always kind of getting beat over the head with is resiliency. So being able to overcome. Sometimes we can be given a lot of curveballs just from the lifestyle. If you need to go here, you need to go there, or this is changing, that you're having to overcome some things. So some of these families have a little bit more grit, as I like to call it, or resiliency, the ability to problem solve, being adaptable or flexible to different conditions. When the pandemic hit, it was really interesting being within my military support group because I noticed the resiliency, the flexibility, the adaptability. Um, that some of those persons had once the pandemic hit, that I noticed that some others were struggling a little bit with. And then also being resourceful. So actually using resources, but also being resourceful with the resources that they do have. Alrighty. So I want us to get into, and like I said, checking my time, y'all. Some of these studies that were looked at, and a lot of the studies that I noticed, and a lot of the research that has been out there, looks at deployment with military spouses, and some even specify military wives. Um, how their mental health was affected if their service member, their spouse was deployed versus um, the spouses who weren't deployed. So Mansfield 2010, what this study did is this study specifically looked at Army, and they reviewed medical records of specifically military wives. And they looked at a 5-year time span during the Iraq and Afghanistan war that service members were deployed. And what they did is they were really just trying to figure out, hey, did spouses of those who had someone deployed during this time frame have more difficulty or more issues with their mental health, or less than those who did not have a spouse that was deployed? Does anybody want to take a wild guess of what they found? Do you think that they found that the spouses who experienced a deployment had a higher rate of mental health issues or a lower?
I would guess higher.
You guessed right. So it was not a trick question at all. Yes, they noticed that it was higher, and it was significantly higher as well. And in addition to that, the spouses that had someone deployed for a longer period of time had higher rates of mental health issues versus those that had shorter periods of time. So I thought that that was important to note as well. They did not in this study identify whether or not somebody was pregnant or postpartum during the time, but I still thought that this was a study that was important for us to review just because history seems to repeat itself. So during other times of like war or worldwide conflict, we've noticed that the mental health in spouses has gone up. And like I said, we don't really know what is going to unfold for us going forward in the next year or so. So I thought it was important for us to note that that is something that happens and takes place. Now, with Tarney 2015, they looked at Army as well, and they reviewed the associations of preterm delivery with postpartum depression among Army spouses, excuse me, who experienced a deployment versus those who did not. And like at the previous study, they noticed that those who experienced a deployment during this time had higher rates of mental health issues. There's more stress that's going on. And they also noticed higher rates of preterm delivery. So they noticed both of those things amongst this group. Now, Levine 2015, I really like this study with Levine because Levine looked at all branches, didn't just look at Army, looked at all of the branches. And so Levine as well wanted to see, hey, is there a difference in whether or not there's a spouse that's deployed versus a spouse that's not? Is there higher rates of mental health issues or concerns related to postpartum perinatal mood and anxiety disorders? And like the other studies found, yes, there is a correlation and an increase in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders in spouses who have experienced a deployment versus not experiencing a deployment. Um, One of the other nice things that Levine's study did is once Levine's study found all of the deployed spouses, and they said, okay, yes, your the risk for mental health is higher. We have you. Now they broke it down a little bit further and said, hey, did this spouse experience a deployment during pregnancy? Did this spouse experience a deployment during the birth of their child? Or did this spouse experience a deployment during up to 6 months of postpartum. And then they actually rated them amongst each other of which one was more at risk than the other or had higher rates of mental health issues. So, like I said, they looked at those. Did you have the deployment during pregnancy? Did you have the deployment during birth? Or did you have the deployment during postpartum? Anybody want to take a guess who ranked the highest for having perinatal mood and anxiety disorders out of those three? All right, and I was just checking to see if we had anything drop in the chat. All right. So amongst that, Levine ended up finding out that those who ended up giving birth and while you were giving birth, if your spouse was gone, they had the highest rates, followed by those who were postpartum, and then followed by those who had the deployment during pregnancy. So kind of ranked it that way. So that can be really important for us to know when working with these families as well. One, we already know, hey, if they're experiencing a deployment, there's a possibility that stress has gone up. But then we also want to look at, is the spouse deployed postpartum? Is the spouse going to be gone when you give birth? Or is there even the chance that they could be gone while you give birth? Or is it during like the very beginning of your pregnancy? So, using myself as an example, my husband, I found out that I was pregnant, and 2 days later, my husband actually deployed with my first son. So he missed the very first part of my pregnancy, but he was back in enough time for us to be able to do like our ultrasounds appointments and deliveries and all of that. And then most recently, my husband ended up deploying now that I'm postpartum and is still gone on that deployment. Another spouse that I worked with, her husband was deployed during delivery. So kind of just, a little bit all over the scale, it could be really important to know where does that person stand and what are some sort resources to get them connected to and how can I help serve them during that time as well. Alrighty. So with the deployment cycle, this is something that one great for us to know, especially if we're working with a family who is experiencing a deployment. As we've seen, the research is heavy on the deployment cycles and times away and times of separation. So, not just looking at it with a deployment, if it's a TDY or if it's a training or if it's any time that the service member is away from their family, we can think about these small little steps and how it may be affecting our client. So with pre-deployment, if your client or the person you're working with is in the pre-deployment space, they could be dealing with, oh my gosh, I can't believe that this is actually happening, that my spouse, my partner is going to be away. So a little bit of denial. Sometimes couples end up distancing mentally as well as physically prior to a deployment, just due to the overwhelming the emotions that of what is about to come, and then feeling kind of nervous and anticipating that the deployment is about to happen. Pre-deployment time is a great time for us to work with folks, if they do actually come in, so that we can help prepare them and get them ready for the deployment. But sometimes that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we catch people in the deployment phase where they're dealing with the loneliness, they're dealing with the overwhelm of pretty much their life and their day-to-day routines and the responsibilities completely changing and being put on that one person who is solo parenting or going through that. Then as time goes by, you know, 21 days to create a habit is what they say. You start to adjust. You start to figure out your flow, your routine. You start to have some confidence in yourself of, okay, I think I can do this. I think I might be able to get through this deployment because how I'm able to make life work and flow for me. Then at some point your spouse is going to return home from the deployment. So there is the pre-integration stage. So this is them coming back in. So that pre-integration stage, kind of like the pre-deployment stage, is that right before period of, oh gosh, they're finally really about to come back. So might be really excited, might be kind of nervous. What is this going to look like? How are they going to fit back into this new routine or life that I had to create in order to survive for these months? So kind of trying to navigate and see what that feels like. This is a great opportunity with working with these families as well. What are some things that you can do to prepare? And then reintegration. This is when they've made it back. They're here. They've come back. So might have that like honeymoon period of just really being excited, having them back in the space, feeling a little bit on like a cloud nine with it, and also trying to figure out, okay, where do we all fit now that you're back in this space? And so much has changed on our ends, as well as yours. So how do we kind of get you back into that space? So this, I think, is really important for us to know if we do have somebody who's dealing with time of separation, of what they may be experiencing mentally and emotionally, and how we can help them work through that, as well as educating them on it. So saying, hey, there is a deployment cycle. Let me explain that to you a little bit. There are some common themes that could possibly pop up. And I think that either I can get you to a provider to help with this, or I can help you with that itself. So I know deployment cycles, again, this can be a lot of information, but any questions related to that before I move on?
I'm wondering if there's like an average time that you're going to be deployed, or your spouse is going to be deployed, between then and the actual leaving the home and the family.
So this will vary essentially on when they find out about the deployment. Um, so that I'm kind of seeing like that pre-deployment period is almost like that window that we're looking at. Now, some persons will find out. For instance, a gentleman that I was working with, his family, he knew about a deployment all the way back in November, and he deployed this month in March. So he knew from November to March, hey, I'm deploying and I'm going to Japan. So he knew exactly where he was leaving. The only thing that fluctuated is he didn't know the exact like date until like March actually hit. But he knew I was leaving the end of March all the way in November. Um, so I think it just kind of varies off of branch as well as maybe circumstance. So for another example, my husband ended up leaving right after Thanksgiving, but we didn't know that he was leaving until the beginning of November. So very much shorter time frame. So our pre-deployment stage was a lot smaller than like a couple of months. So I think it kind of varies on the circumstances. And with deployment cycles, they will typically know how long they're deployed. So they'll know like, hey, I'm deploying and I'm leaving for 4 months, or hey, I'm deploying and I'm going to be gone for 9 months, or I'm going to be gone for 12 months. So that's typically something that's known up front when you're looking at the entire deployment cycle. So Heather, say you were working with a family and they said, hey, it's November, I'm deploying in March, and I'm going to be gone from March until August. You actually would have been able to encompass all of those stages, because you would be working with them during pre-deployment. When deployment actually happens and takes place and the service member leaves, you see that phase. You can assist with the adjusting, and then you can kind of look at the changes of like, okay, they're getting ready to come home. They're talking about that, the pre-integration phase, and then also capture the part where they're back there in the house.
Great, thank you.
Okay, I was going to say, does that make sense? So kind of a long way of saying it depends, but they'll typically know how long they are gone. And in an ideal world, they'll always know well enough in advance, but sometimes that doesn't always happen.
So it's possible that it could be just days, like a last minute kind of.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it can be days, but a lot of times that I think would be very, very extreme circumstances just because most service members they have to be deployment ready. So sometimes they have to have different trainings, they have to get different shots, they have to go and get different medical things taken care of. So that would probably be like extreme, extreme circumstances for it to be days, but nothing's impossible. All right. So, how can we help these families manage times of separation? So, I know my time is kind of cranking down, y'all. Um, like I said, when pre deployment, ideally we would love to capture people during that, but sometimes we can't all the time. But that's okay. We can still work with what we have. But if you do have time to capture somebody during kind of that pre deployment phase, and I put TDYs on here as well, because anytimes during separation, you can help them with like a family care plan. So if you know that the spouse is going to be leaving, simple things as whose name or who pays the bills. If your name isn't on the bills, what are the logins? Like, make sure that you have those things together so that, like, your lights, your electricities, if you live off base, all of that is getting covered and that's getting paid for. Also, if something happens and something takes place and you need to be able to kind of act in the space of the spouse, is there a power of attorney? So, one of the nice things with bases is they have a legal department. They have a place where they can go. They can have an attorney do a power of attorney for free right there on base and have that take place. So, if the service member or the family that you're talking to isn't aware of this, you can let them know. Go straight on base, get the power of attorney just in case your partner or spouse ever has to act as you. They have that power of attorney right there with them. Who's going to do lawn care? Who's going um, to take care of different little odds and ends if something was to break in the home? Like having just some kind of details of a family care plan of how are you going to pay your bills, how are you going to manage something in the house if it breaks, if you need to have a power of attorney and make certain specific decisions, do you have that taken care of? So a family care plan can be as detailed or as minimal as possible, but just kind of letting them know about these things. Also, how are you all going to communicate? Is the person on a ship and all they can do is email? Are you going to be able to actually video chat or talk through WhatsApp? My husband is able to use WhatsApp all the way over there in Germany. Um, are you going to have to like write a letter? What is going to take place? How are you going to be able to communicate? And what's the time difference? And also, how can you connect at a distance? If there's any major holidays or birthdays or celebrations or things taking place, is there a way that we can kind of plan in advance for the family to still be able to connect and enjoy those times as much as possible at a distance? Do you have any kiddos? Are you going to do any time tracking? Are you going to have them mark a calendar? Are you going to have them eat an M&M for every single time that every day that the service member is gone? Are you going to track the time? And I found that this can be helpful with like elementary to middle school age kids. Also, is there any community resources that we're able to get them connected to? Do you know about any educational programs or sports programs or moms groups or support groups or breastfeeding that you can connect these families to? And as well as like outsourcing services to make life a little bit easier. Are you able to do like grocery pickup or have a cleaning service or have a family friend that's able to come once out of the week to assist or to be there for you? And also reconnecting. This would be like pre-integration stage. How are you able to work on things that you can do to connect once that person is home? Alrighty. And so one big thing that I think is a game changer for the military community, and Olga, I know you said that you're pregnant right now, but I think that this is really, really important. And this is something that you could even utilize for yourself as being a military spouse. So, like we said, hey, we're concerned about spouses who end up having somebody who's gone during a deployment, during a time of separation, or whatnot. Well, if the ops tempo is super high, and the spouse is working a lot, working a lot, working a lot, that's time where that person is still gone. Or depending on that person's job, do they work overnight? That could be a time where that person is gone. Well, TRICARE, the medical insurance for the military, came out with a new kind of demonstrative study this year. So it's brand new in 2022, and it's going to be over a 5-year period. But it's the TRICARE Childbirth and Breastfeeding Support Demonstration. And you see that they've already created an acronym for it, CBSD. Well, what it does is it covers certified non-medical labor doulas, certified lactation consultants, and certified lactation counselors.
Patients, sorry to interrupt. This is just a 5-minute warning.
Thank you so much. I was checking out my time too. Those that are covered and can receive these services are TRICARE Prime members as well as TRICARE Select. So if you have TRICARE Prime or TRICARE Select as your insurance, or your client does, then you're covered underneath these services. In order to get doula services, you just have to be 20 weeks pregnant. In order to follow underneath the breastfeeding support, you just have to be 27 weeks. What these cover is for doulas, they'll cover 6 total kind of meetings or services by that doula, and it can be during pregnancy or it can be postpartum. So if you want to have 6 before, or you want to have 6 after, or you want to split it up, or you wanted to have them there during delivery, you could. One other thing, when we're working with our clients, eligibility. TRICARE can be very frustrating and very difficult with navigating the insurance, and sometimes they want us to have referrals. But what TRICARE is saying is that you're eligible. You don't have to submit any claims. You're 100% eligible as long as you're 20 weeks pregnant or 27 weeks pregnant. Online, they do have where you can click the tab and you can look at the certified providers in the area who are underneath TRICARE to get connected to one of those persons. A referral is only needed if you're trying to go to somebody who is out of network. And that's pretty typical with most insurances. But I think that this can be a huge game changer with providing support and helping to reduce the risk factors of time of separations as well as deployment for military spouses, because they can have that support of that doula who can possibly be there with them during delivery or prior to or even afterwards, postpartum, as well as those lactation consultants and counselors. Any questions or any reflections on this particular kind of bill that TRICARE put into place? Alrighty, we'll keep rocking and rolling. So with connecting to services, I want us to keep in mind some of the military specific resources as well as community resources. You, as somebody who lives in the community, can connect people to the things that you know and the providers that you work with and your own colleagues. Once you have kind of learned that military culture, developed that rapport, you can make that connection with them, you can refer them. And if somebody I know and trust is referring me to someone else, I'm going to be more likely to listen. Also, like I said, just keeping in mind some of the deployment related services, the different types of counselors that might be on base, and different types of resources that can be found within the readiness centers, you can help connect these military families too, and just let them know, like, hey, did you even know that Give Parents a Break is a thing? Typically, if you contact the Readiness Center, They'll give you like a voucher, and like once or twice a month, you can drop your child off for free child care for like a couple of hours to do whatever it is that you want. Or you can get connected to military family life counselors for 12 free counseling sessions, or Military One Source for free counseling sessions, or their new parent program. A lot of bases also have new parent support programs where they can get connected to those as well, or different spouses clubs or Facebook groups to build a sense of community. So we've gone over tons of different ways as how we can support and connect with military families. Um, and I do have on the next slide, so this is just a recap of that. If you actually have the slides in the PDF version, you'll be able to click on the resources that are underlined. So, like TRICARE will take you to the page where it talks about the TRICARE demonstration for childbearing and breastfeeding. The support groups will take you directly to those for Postpartum Support International, Shades of Blue, and Cherish Mom. The different blogs and magazines will take you directly to those. Military One Source, if you click that, it'll take you to their website as well as the MFLAG part, and then also Give an Hour. It'll take you directly to those sites, so that you can have that information and be able to share it with others that you know within the military community. So, again, I know this was a lot of information, um, but I'm happy we were able to chat throughout. I know we don't really have a ton of time for questions at the end, but if you do have anything that pops up or anything that you want to run by me, or if you say, hey, can you remind me of that resource, please just shoot me an email. It's right there. Also, hyperlinked is my website as well as my LinkedIn and my Instagram. If you want to connect over there, I'm perfectly okay with that. So I am going to stop sharing my screen, and I know that we don't have very much time, but I do want to thank you all for coming and being and sharing this space with me. Any last minute things before we have to hop off really, really quickly?
Patience, I really appreciated this information. All of it was new to me. It's so helpful to know these things and know how to support military spouses. It's wonderful.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. Again, thank you all so much for being here, and just coming and learning and sharing and being in the space of how we can support military families. Like I said, things throughout the PDF is hyperlinked, so to help you get there, to learn a little bit more about the resources. And if you do have a question or something that pops up, please don't hesitate. Just shoot me an email, and I'll try my best to answer your question. But thank you all again so much, and I hope that you all enjoy the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
You are so welcome.